Hello, loved ones. This is Matt Stevens, and I hope you're doing super fantastic. And I've had one of you request, not necessarily, I don't know if a request, but recommend it. Yes, recommend that I do like a bookshelf tour. And I'm like, wow, that's cool because I've watched other people do them, and I guess just being a book nerd, anytime somebody starts bringing out the books, I'm like, I'm all in, man. I'm like, yeah, bring them on. Let's do it. Let's look at what you got. And I'm like, that's great. That's a great idea because every book nerd, particularly, because I used to be a big comic book nerd back in the days. And of course, anytime anybody else would bring out their comic books, it'd be like, bring them on. Let's look them over. And it's just fun. So I'm like, yeah, that's cool. So I've got behind me like a collection of books that I think are probably my favorites, right? These are the ones that I guess turn to the most or whatever. However, I'm like for example, like the staples I think that somebody must have in a collection if you're exploring spirituality or spiritual awakening or consciousness, things like that. I feel like whether you like them or not is Secret Teaching or the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. I understand he was a Freemason and all that, but it's kind of like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Regardless of how you feel about him, it's his knowledge of just all things esoteric and metaphysical or whatever is pretty amazing. And I've started ordering his smaller books, such as the Sacred Magic of the Kabbalah. And I don't know, I haven't read this one yet. I've flipped through it, but But regardless of how you feel about Manly P. Hall, I'm like, that book, I feel like you got to have it. Also, I mention a lot the Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Itzhak Bentov. Itzhak Bentov, by far my favorite. And he only had 2 books. But you got to read them in order. Stalking the Wild Pendulum first, then A Brief Tour of Higher Consciousness. Now, I really kind of want to zero in right here on A Brief Tour of Higher Consciousness. It's not really talked about a whole lot. When people talk about Itzhak Bentov, the most thing that people talk about is where he was, with regards to the gateway process for that CIA document that was declassified, and a lot of people, Bob Monroe had a lot to do with it and stuff, and they were talking about how the CIA was exploring consciousness and for lack of a better term, how to make psychic spies and things like that. But he had a lot to do with that, or at least he helped them develop that whole thing. And of course, that is where you get into the conspiracy, whether or not he was how his life ended. But I'm not really going to get into that right now. But most will agree that Itzhak Bentov was absolutely brilliant. And I wanted to kind of zero in on one little part in the brief tour of higher consciousness. In that it says, visualize our bodies as being composed of very thin, filmy sponges. These sponges are immersed in an infinite ocean, the void. And the water is penetrating them throughout. When we, the sponges, move, the water or the void just flows through our bodies. It fills us and we are inseparable from it. This is the way things are on the micro level, as they are also on the galactic or macro level. The void is everywhere, a matrix in which everything exists and which permeates everything. Fortunately, our senses disregard all these facts and assemble lovely faces, flowers, and houses from hunks of void for us to enjoy. But we know now that our senses are deceiving us. The gruesome facts still remain. We are hunks of vibrating, wiggly void. Sorry about that. The situation gets even worse if we consider the following. As you read this book, you are thinking, we hope. Most people believe that we think with our brains. That's not quite so, but let us assume that it is. We know that our brains are made up of wiggly atoms. And these wiggly atoms are made up, for the most part, of void. Right now, your thinking processes are occurring on the background of the interstellar void, which is filling your brain. Consequently, your thinking consists of modifications in the vibratory processes of the void or pure consciousness. But remember that this void is not your private void. Everybody and everything is made up of this vibrating void. Whether you like it or not, your thinking processes spread out and affect all creation. There is no privacy, and at this point, it's too late to complain. So, what he's saying here, which is brilliant, because it's Akhmetov, and everything he says is brilliant, pretty much, even if he's being goofy, which he's definitely did that too. But he's saying that, like, we understand that atoms are mostly void, right? And I think it's even right before this part, it says, to visualize the nucleus of a hydrogen atom as being about 1 millimeter in diameter, or the size of a pinhead. And the size of the electron's orbit would be the circle approximately 30 feet in diameter. So the pinhead is lost somewhere in its center, and then the orbit of the electron, the single electron in this hydrogen atom, is 30 feet in diameter. So the rest is just void that vibrates when it's, I guess, when it's stimulated, right? So the point is, your entire body, your whole body is mostly void, right? I think it's 99.9999% void is in an atom. And that is the same void that is in what we would call interstellar space. So your vibration, these atoms are really just in the void, and then there's an occasional disturbance, there's an occasional vibration here and there, which would be the atom. And then, of course, there's quadrillions of atoms, I don't know. However many atoms it is that makes up your avatar are all mostly void, floating in this other void. And then if you really want to zoom it out step by step, it's like, okay, so there's that atom, mostly void, and it's in a piece of say, part of your body, made up of other atoms, mostly void, made up of your entire body, made up of atoms, so therefore it's mostly void. On this planet, made up of atoms, so therefore mostly void, floating in a space that is void, until you get to another planet, which is very far away, or whatever the case may be. The point is, when you look at it from the void perspective, you are a disturbance in the void. You're a vibration in the void. But all the void is just to and fro. It's flowing here. It's flowing there. It's just it's like it said about the ocean, how the water goes in and out and through, and it moves with the ocean. The void, the ocean, the sponge, the ocean being the void in the analogy. So the sponge being you, but the void flows through and in, and the sponge is going through it, and there you go. And that's putting it brilliantly. And that's one of the things about Itzhak Bentov that is just amazing, is how he so eloquently and describes things in a way that's easy to understand. Now, I'm not a science guy at all. I've mentioned that. I don't want to say it's hard for me to understand things, but I'm not interested in science. I'm not. However, I do understand and appreciate the fact that it's going to help me understand the bigger picture if I do understand these things. Like, I don't really care about the makeup of an atom. However, whenever I gain that understanding, it does help me to understand that the void is consciousness. It's the greater consciousness. It's the consciousness of God, consciousness of, it's just the universal mind, the universal consciousness. And your mind is in it, my mind is in it, and then the avatar that your mind is plugged into currently And then is also that's plugged into this realm currently. All of that is, we can step back out and then we can step it back down. But the point is, it's all void with little disturbances here and there. But it ain't much. It ain't a whole lot. The disturbances, well, they're just kind of here and there. So when I'm talking, so getting back to this, talking about books, I got to say the big dog, the big dog is Itzhak Bentov, and then of course The Secret Teaching of All Ages, just because there's so much different. It's like a little encyclopedia of metaphysical things, right? And the holographic universe has been very helpful in understanding all this. And Itzhak Bentov went into holographic universal theory a lot, and it was before this. But this book right here was very, it's been, a lot of people refer to it when they are talking about the nature of reality and how it could be a three-dimensional projection of a two-dimensional plane and how that works. And I am not prepared to explain that, but I do recommend that book. But I've always, and I've recommended it many times, but I've also said, be prepared to read a lot of medical science, which for me was hard to get through because it just is, so there's that. And then of course, The Republic by Plato, which is mostly there. And for me, I appreciate Plato a lot, but mainly with the allegory of the cave with regards to talking about the nature of reality and how it's all about your perception, because the prisoners in the cave, their perception, their what they perceived as reality was just shadows on a wall. But since it's all they had ever known, that was the world in there to them, until the one escaped and went out of the cave and saw what we consider to be reality, and came back in and was like, oh my gosh, you guys, you're not going to believe this, but this is not all there is. This is not even close to all that's truly there. But they refused to believe it, right? He probably should have just went on his merry way and enjoyed the rest of his life. But it's like that goes so deep, because for one, it tells us, are we the prisoners in the cave? Right? Is the reality we're looking at, is it really just shadows on the wall compared to what somebody else is possibly seeing? Very possible, right? How could we know unless we were to escape the cave? Unless we were to understand the nature of reality and understand that there is far more to this than than our five senses will allow us to see. We know that scientifically. We can see that. We can see that we know that we can only perceive about less than 5% of the entire light spectrum. What else is there to see that we're just not seeing? Are there beings that are literally walking right in front of me right now that I'm unable to perceive, and maybe they're unable to perceive me? Yeah, that's probably the case. So that's just one reason why I think that allegory of the cave is so important. And then I've also mentioned Quantum Spirituality by Peter Canova. That's a very good one too. That one is amazing because it goes into the whole quantum field and creation, and it's amazing. It's something I got to recommend for sure. And then on this side over here, I got books that I can't say that's not true. I was going to say I got books I haven't all the way read yet, but yeah, I have. But anywho, some of which, like for example, right now I'm still working on A New Science of Heaven and Exposing the Expositions by Howdy McCoskey. Of course, this is more about, I'm really into reset theory. I think that this realm has been reset many times, and this is kind of proof of it. Some people think that it was just not necessarily resets like a simulation reset. And I'm like, I can't necessarily say that's the case, but this is more talking about like the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, things like that, and how these massive, amazing buildings came to be. And they said that it was constructed. The official narrative is that it was constructed in less than 2 years. But then they also go on to say that it was mostly like chicken wire and plaster, not permanent buildings, blah, 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 things like that. And I'm like, if you look at some of these photos, I'm trying to find one. I've got a bunch saved on my computer, and I was going to do a presentation on this at some time in the very near future. But if you look at some of these buildings, it's like they just did that. I mean, they just did that in 2 years, huh? That is really hard to believe. Just for example, I mean, that's just one thing. That's the Central Court at I believe, the World's Fair in St. Louis. Yes. And I mean, it's like that was just temporary, huh? Just temporary. And they just built that for the purpose of having a little World's Fair, which I know it's not a little, but an exposition. Anyway, I think that is fascinating. And I think there is a lot to that shows how there have been times in this realm, on this server Earth, give me that, please, dear loved one, that it was that this has been used before for other runs of the sim, and there have been artifacts left. As I've said before, any computer nerd will tell you that anytime you reboot, reset, restore a computer hard drive to original factory settings, it's never back to factory settings. In fact, if you have I think somebody explained to me that if you have a hard drive with, let's say, 100 memory on it, and then you use it, and then you decide, I'm going to reset it. So you reset it. It should go back to having 100, but it doesn't. It might go only back to having about 95. It's like, well, what's occupying that 5? Well, that would be artifacts. That would be the fossils. That would be the whatever that is left on that hard drive from that previous run. To me, that would be the artifacts and fossils and ruins and things like that we do find here buried, and just things we cannot explain. Right? Buildings that would be impossible. Buildings that we can build today, let alone 150 years ago. It's just not possible. And by the way, there's they built that 100 and the one in Chicago, 130 years ago, supposedly. And they built it in less than 2 years, and it's massive. But anyway, that's off subject again. But anyway, dear loved one, that's kind of a little, I guess, a book tour. I mean, it's not exactly, but I'm thinking about going in little pieces. But if you're just curious, I also have the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Books of Enoch, the Light of Egypt, which I have a presentation I'm working on with that. That one will be really very deeply Hermetic. It's by Thomas Burgoyne. And then also Emmanuel Velikovsky, Worlds in Collision, which he was very controversial, like back in the 1950s when he put out Worlds in Collision, because he has a much different take on catastrophism and how the world came to be. But anyway, there you go. So anyway, loved ones, if you have not hit the like button on this video, and I got to believe anybody who's still watching, you're definitely a book nerd. You're definitely a book nerd. That's all right. You're safe here. This is a safe haven for book nerds right here. So, Rizwan Burke's Simulation Hypothesis and the Simulated Multiverse. I have not read Simulated Multiverse yet, but I will. Of course, I got the Kybalion. You got to have that, and the Dhammapada, which is a Buddhist. It's mostly poetry. It's beautiful. It is. And then nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are. That book, I believe, is out of print. It's kind of a cult classic amongst metaphysics. I believe some of it, not all of it, but there's that. And then a new one that I was able to get my hands on that's out of print is the Evolution Handbook. It's really cool. It's very good at disproving evolution, and it's from a very religionist take, and that's fine. I mean, it's okay. We can, I don't mind that. I'm not necessarily going to agree with a lot of the religionist views in there. However, the science is solid. I mean, it's very solid. So there you go. But anyway, if you haven't hit the like button yet, please do so. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so. Besides that, that's what I got for you, dear loved one. And I'll be back directly.